drum up God all night. We can pray all night. But if we continue allowing a few selfish and greedy people to destroy our forest in this fashion, then we deserve to die. We deserve to starve. We deserve to be held by other people in contempt. Nigumuganira rugano na ndi rugano rwa muiritu wathire gutaha mai. When the British came here, they did not understand the trees that they found. Africa was always presented as the jungle that needed to be conquered. There was almost a gusto of trying to tame the land. So they literally burned the forest into ashes. Today, I can almost not recognize my childhood countryside. I can hardly see that anymore. When you see those things and you understand those things, you become restless. You want to do something. And sometimes if you have an idea of what you can do, then you go for it. It may not work, but quite often in our times, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
At the beginning of things, when mankind started to populate the earth, the man Gikuyu, the founder of the tribe, was called by the Mogai, the divider of the universe, and was given as his share the land with the ravines, the rivers, the forests, the game, and all the gifts that the Lord of nature bestowed on mankind.
I remember one time my mother told me not to collect firewood under the fig tree. That's a tree of God. Later on, I understood that the fig tree and a few other trees were considered sacred trees by the Kikuyus. It was treated almost the way we now treat churches. By the time Kenya became a colony, the fig tree had been cut to make way for tea.
Waarabu walikuja na kuwatupilia mbali Wareno. Waingereza walikuja na kukaa kama wakoloni. Na mwisho wa karne ya 19, karibu kontinenti lote la Afrika lilikuwa limegawanywa kati ya mataifa ya kibeberu. Nchi yote ilizungukwa na ngome za kivita za Mwingereza.
When the British came here, this country looked to them like a country that could easily be developed into an agricultural country. It was a good colony, and they decided to settle. They came up with a very ingenious idea of, instead of forcing people to go and work on their land, they introduced a tax. You had to pay it using coins or cash, money. work so that they could get the cash to pay the tax. And so my father, my mother, her co-wives, they all worked. And my older sisters, they worked. Actually, as you became, say, about 7 or 8, you started working in the field, picking pyrethrum. We were very close to the forest, the Aberdare forest, and on the other side, to the distance, we had Mount Kenya. For me, Nyeri was like the Garden of Eden. Absolutely green everywhere, hills and valleys. You almost know the trees by name, just like you yourself, you are known by name. With the coming of the colonial administration, a completely new chapter gets into the country where we begin what we can call development. And development for us meant clearing the bush. I remember seeing the Aberdare forest on fire, bonfires everywhere in the forest. So what was happening? The forest was being tamed. They were clearing indigenous forests to replace those indigenous forests with exotic plantations of pines and eucalyptus. The typical hut of an African doesn't require the very tall eucalyptus, but the new houses that were being built in the new colony required these kind of trees. But what we did not know then, of course, was that this was destroying, we were destroying our catchment areas, our water catchment areas. We were literally burning into ashes our beautiful biodiversity of animals, of plants, of birds. I remember one time I was traveling with one of my aunts. We were going to the market, and I heard the river. And I asked her, what is that? And she told me, that's Gura River. And I never forgot. And then we came to a point at the edge of the valley where I could actually see it. And it looked to me like a huge snake rolling down. Beautiful. But some 40 years later, it was no longer rolling. In Nakuru, where we lived, there were no schools for African children. So anybody who wanted to educate their children had to send them back to reserves. My father had actually gone to school for a few years, so he wanted his children to go to school, but his boys. And my mother, at one point, she wanted to learn how to read and write. So one day she came, and she came home, she stood in front of me. She was very tall, and she looked very smart, very tall, very beautiful, and she told me, I'm learning how to read and write. Well, she didn't go very far, but I always remembered that moment, how happy, how confident, how inspired she was, because she was doing something that so many of us take for granted. The way I went to school was almost accidental. I was not meant to go to school, but it was my eldest brother, Derito. Probably I just, another kid, just wondering, why is my sister not going to school? And my mother, bless her heart, she didn't see any reason why I shouldn't go to school. And she said, there is no reason. And I'm very grateful to my mother, because she could have said, I need her. And nobody would have thought about it. It would not have been strange at all, because many girls were not going to school at that time. But once I was sent to school, well, I went. I remember the headmistress of our school coming to me and saying, there is an opportunity to go to America. Would you like to go? And I said, yes. How easy is that? At this time, and unknown to us, there was a young senator in Massachusetts, United States of America, called Kennedy. Kennedy and the politicians at that time in the US thought that this is one way in which they could have their influence in the region, which until then was close to them because this was an area where the European powers were in charge, was to encourage young Africans who were going to be the future leaders of these newly emerging nations to go to the United States of America and study. And I spent 4 years there, wonderful years. All the time I was in America, I was looking forward to coming back. And when I arrived here, I joined Kenyans who were enthusiastic about the new country. We had just become independent in 1963. Kenyatta was robust. We had a wonderful government, very enthused. The people in Kenya were very energized. So I joined them at the University of Nairobi, and I was looking forward to my first job. That was really when I started advocacy and when I started activism. I started in the University of Nairobi. I realized that as a woman, and one of the very, very few women, there were only, at that time, there were actually just about 3 of us. I was surprised to see that I was getting less money than my male colleagues. My friend and I, Professor Bayer, we teamed up.
We were 2 women coming from opposite directions in a situation where there were no other women. So I think we just gravitated to each other because we wanted to find out who, the other person is and why that person is there. So with that, we went for our first cup of tea. I mean, we just met each other in the hall and said, let's have tea. Then you tell me who you are and I tell you who I am. So that's how it started.
We started agitating, trying to say that as far as I'm concerned, you get equal pay for equal work. We were way ahead. Although we finally succeeded, it looked like, why do I have to fight this fight? I am doing a good job, sometimes a better job. I started then understanding that what I had always believed may not be so. I had always come to believe that the sky was the limit, that I could do anything. I have the capacity, and I have the commitment, and I have the passion to do anything. I can do anything. Then I started realizing that other human beings can define your potential. I was amazed, and I knew then that sometimes people talk. Women will talk about women's rights. Women will talk about empowering women. Women will talk about the need to give women rights. But the challenge is really when it is not you who is fighting for yourself, but you are being asked to join so that others may benefit. So many times, women are not willing to stand up because they are afraid of offending the men they are married to. And that to me was an eye-opener. Because I knew then that women don't always give you support because it is the right thing to do. I have always wanted a family. I wanted a husband. That's why I married. And I wanted children. And I wanted to raise them in a family situation. But sometimes it doesn't work because, and it doesn't even work if you could subdue those talents. You could subdue yourself. But it doesn't always work.
The first time that she went to the prison was right after her divorce case. You know, she said she thought that the judge was either incompetent or corrupt. And that became an issue for contempt of court. And that's when she was found guilty of contempt and sent to Langata.
I represented her for contempt of court case. Here was a man, her husband, who chose to make the allegation of adultery, and there wasn't any evidence whatsoever that she had committed adultery. And it's quite clear, it's something that pained her a lot because it was just fabricated. And the judge was obviously given money, and he made a finding against her.
She was seen as someone who had made a statement about what was considered to be a very important establishment organ, and that's the courts. People are now talking about climate change. Environment and climate change was not such a popular issue almost 30 years ago, okay, when this idea was first discussed.
I listened to the women from the rural areas, and they're the ones who kind of gave me the trigger that told me, take action. Because they said they need clean drinking water. They need firewood. They need food, adequate food, nutritious food. And they need income. And at that point, I suggested to the women, we should plant trees. And I wasn't, of course, thinking about a movement. I was just thinking of something to do as a response to what the women from the countryside were saying. And that eventually is what became the Greenbelt movement.
It was, to her and to others, obvious that desertification is what is happening. People were already having a problem getting enough water. The link with the cutting down of trees to make for eventually a desert was so closely intertwined.
The more I understood it, the more I pushed and tried to mobilize women especially so that we could plant trees. Once I started, there was a way in which I was literally pulled into it. And perhaps because I really understood that this environment is under threat, something very drastic is happening in our country, and it's going to be dangerous to our country in years to come.
Okay.
For the very first trees that we planted at Kamukoji, and it was on World Environment Day, 5th of June, 1977. So we planted 7 trees on that day. Already I had started thinking about how can we encourage people in Kenya to remember the people who fought for freedom. So I said that one way in which we can remember our heroes, but also start a tree planting campaign, was to say that we will plant a tree for our local heroes. I had already begun to feel that we were almost over-glorified those who were the leaders of the time. But at that time, nobody really wanted to raise their voice against the government.
I, Daniel Roy Moy, do swear that I'll be faithful and bear true allegiance to the Republic of Kenya.
President Moy was in power for 24 years. That's a long time. Greenbelt movement had just started, had just been registered in 1977. So both of us almost came into the scene at the same time. I was trying to plant trees and he was running the country. And the only reason why our path crossed was because I was trying to protect public land and he was very busy either acquiring or facilitating private acquisition of the same. During the colonial period, all land belonged to the crown. So whatever the governor wanted to do with the land, that was what he did. But at independence, a lot of land went into private hands, and what was public land and was supposed to be commonly owned by Kenyans quite often was privatized by people who knew where that land was and who could manipulate the ministries so that they get a title deed to it. And that became a very common form of corruption. When the president wants to do favors to those who support him, or those who campaign for him, or those who vote for him, or their leaders, he would give them public lands.
Harambe, harambe, tuimbe pamoja. Harambe, harambe, tuimbe pamoja. Harambe, harambe, tuimbe pamoja.
A young man came to me. I didn't know him. And he introduced himself and said he's a lawyer. He got to know that there was a plan to put a 62-story skyscraper in Uhuru Park. It was going to be the headquarters of the ruling party, KANU. I thought this would be ridiculous if Nairobi didn't have an open green space. I had come to appreciate the wisdom of the fathers who laid down Nairobi. They had created wonderful open green spaces, but these had gradually been taken over, given out by the government to people who were developing hotels or buildings.
pamoja, muongoze na usalama.
This was really the last of that wonderful green space that the planners of Nairobi had left open.
It occurred to her that as the Greenbelt movement, something should be said against it. Partly because individuals who are supporting or were supporting the organization expected environmentalists to say something about it, because it did not make sense to support tree planting at the same time others were removing trees to put up concrete structures.
There was going to be a 5-6-story statue of Moi looking towards Kenyatta. You know, there's Kenyatta's statue just in front of Kenyatta International Conference Center. So there will be these two big statues. Of course, Moi had designed his statue to be bigger than Kenyatta's. And then they'll be looking across to each other. So for Moi, this was a personal project to show what he had done and to stamp his authority, as it were.
At that particular time, our then president Moi was so powerful that nobody would ever dare go against his wishes. She filed a case against the ruling party KANU and the president, whom she named in her affidavit. By that time, the president was out of the country. When he landed at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi, he declared that he had just heard that some woman somewhere is trying to sue him. And he says that case will not go anywhere. And indeed, it did not go anywhere.
We said that it would be against public interest for the building to be built on that park. The judge said I had no local standing, and therefore I lost the case.
When the court process, failed, then Wangari decided, just to now use civil disobedience and some more familiar. I mean, she's a master of this. And, we had several demonstrations in Uhuru Park, and we went there at her invitation.
I decided to write a letter to the then Minister for Environment. And of course, they ignored me. So I wrote again, and this time I decided to inform the press. Those who were involved got very agitated because I was really opening up a Pandora's box, and they didn't like that.
She said, now to make a good statement, we ought to write to somebody who can get to the big supporters of that project. She wrote through to the British High Commission to tell them, don't support it because you would not do the same thing in Hyde Park. I am sure that when she wrote the letter, she thought that there would probably be a debate about what was happening at Uhuru Park. Not this force of an intimidation to almost say the very fact that you protest means that you must be finished.
Moi unleashed the entire state machinery, the police to attack her. He was on various public platforms calling her all sorts of names.
The parliament, for some reason, they decided to get involved. They stopped parliamentary proceedings to discuss me. And of course, they had nothing but abusive language. They had even said that I'm a divorced woman, so what can a divorcee tell anybody? I told them that I'm quite prepared to discuss with them the whole issue, but I don't really want to deal with some of the I don't want to deal with the petty issues. I said that I want to engage them, but I want to engage their anatomy above the neck. I wasn't interested with whatever lies below the waist.
The government was criticized to some extent for allowing that to happen on the green space, okay? And that, again, infuriated even more. That made the sponsor in Britain decide to withdraw because too much negative publicity would do his enterprise no good. Then the World Bank thought that if it's not financed to a large extent by private means, why would we give a huge World Bank loan for this? So that fell through.
Many people think that that case was the beginning of the end of the Moi regime, because from that time on, people felt that if one insignificant woman could stop such a building by literally just pushing and looking for an opportunity to bring out the truth and expose the corruption, then obviously this government can be brought down. The government had entrenched itself so strongly and was literally holding everybody by the neck.
She became a target for harassment, and I'm sure that she became a target to silence her on that event and for the future.
I would be walking down the streets of Nairobi on one side of the street, and people I know, when they see me, they would cross the street to go to the other side. Rest we meet, and we are seen together. Such was the fear that people had of the government, that if you were perceived to be on the wrong side of the government, the public avoided you. So you really felt alone. By that time, I was getting concerned that if they really are trying to get me, if they can't get me, they'll probably get my children. And people were worried about the children. They were saying, the children are constantly seeing you being dragged, being beaten, being humiliated, being abused. Maybe it is better if they were not here. So eventually they went to the United States of America to study. Almost everybody had been muzzled. Nobody could raise a voice, and nothing was being written about. And if you disappeared, people just say, well, he has disappeared. We don't see him. We don't know where he went.
Through the cold, the heat, 2 nights and 3 days, the 5 mothers of the political prisoners, relatives and friends continue their hunger strike.
This is Karura Forest. When Nairobi was created, it was created around this forest, almost being at the boundary, the outer boundary of the forest. And for almost 100 years, people have been encroaching on this forest. And the last batch was to disappear around about 10 years ago now, when some very prominent politicians were allocated this forest and they wanted to put a housing development project. One day, I was called by some people. This was a white man. He had been riding through Karura Forest with his horse. And he noticed that stones and roads and constructions were going on in Karura Forest. So he called me and he said, "Have you heard or did you know?" I said, "No." We knew that this forest is extremely important for Nairobi.
We went there, I remember one day, to just survey, to see what was happening. And that's when we found the place guarded by officers that belonged to the established security forces. So that was surprising. So that also let us all know that this was no minor development.
All the roads had been constructed, all the roads had been tarmacked, and even the side stonework had been put in place, the culverts, drainages. It was all done.
So again, we wrote to the Ministry of Environment and asked them, is it true that Karura Forest is being subdivided? And is it true that people are being given this land to develop, to build houses, high-class houses? And is it true that the people who have been given this land are mostly people in the government? Now, of course, as usual, they ignore you. One day, we just decided to go to Karura Forest. And we decided that we are going to rehabilitate Karura Forest. We came to plant trees, as we have done in the past. It's a very sad saga that we have a government in this country that is actually overseeing the destruction of forests and the grabbing of public land. Whenever we wanted to enter the forest, we couldn't, because the police and the forest guards would be all over the forest, making sure that we cannot go into the forest to do our tree planting. We would be chased often by hired thugs. The more we became insisting that Karura cannot be built on, that what Karura needs is a rehabilitation of the forest, the more the gangs would be violent. One time we caught the police giving these gangs instruction, and they were in uniform and in a car, in a government car, written Kenya Police. Wow.
So actually, some of them were standing here, and others were on top of this structure. They were shouting in Swahili, saying, "Nyinyi tokeni hapo, nyinyi, nyinyi," and of course, they were using abusive language. Saying, "Nyinyi kwendeni huko, mnajifanya nini, mnajua nini? Hii mnajifanya hii ni nchi yenu, hii ni kwetu." And then Wangari Maathai would say, "Ni kwetu namna gani? Hii ni nchi yetu. Huu msitu ni wetu." The villagers from that from the nearby slum here, they also say, "No, tumekuja kuchukua mali yetu. Hii ni nchi yetu, ni mali yetu. Tunataka kuchukua mali yetu. Tunataka kupanda miti kwa kijiji chetu."
We pleaded with them to allow us to go through the wood. Then we told them that we would plant a tree at the gate. And it's as if while we were trying to plant the tree at the gate, that they literally came down on us and all hell broke loose. You're trying to save a forest. You can see the people who are grabbing it. You can see the corruption. You can see the greed. You can see the selfishness. You're almost not thinking of the danger that you are in. You are occupied with the issue that is on hand. After the attack, we went to the police station and we wanted to write a statement, and they were not interested. Eventually, they gave us the book where we could put the complaint. And I was so infuriated. So I touched the blood and signed my name with the blood. I said, oh, there you go. If we are going to shed blood because of our land, we will. We are used to that. Our forefathers shed blood for our land. We will do so. This is my blood.
The young people decided that they would demonstrate in a more forceful way. And that's when things were set on fire. When she looked over and she saw the fire, she told somebody, hey, something is burning, and it may be the trees.
It was the house that was on fire, thank God, not the forest or what was left of the forest. I think that confrontation on that day, which, as I say, included members of parliament, was probably the time when Karura was saved. The Maathai really just died a natural death. The forest was just left.
And that is actually what saved Karura Forest. There was no contractor thereafter was prepared to go and carry on the work.
For you to be able to protect public resources, public goods, it is very important that you have a government that is responsible, that is accountable, that is not oppressive, that is not corrupt. What is happening is tragic. Protect your forest. It's your life. As a young girl, I did not have any fear of the environment. As we grow up, we internalize the environment we are in because of the way we interact with it. And I was interacting very closely with the environment. Even now, looking back, of course I can say, well, a bit crazy a little bit, but I'm glad that we did it. I was almost like the voice of those who couldn't articulate, the voice of those who could not stand up and say what needed to be said. now when I look back, I would only ask myself, why is it that we in this region put ourselves and put our children and put our people through these struggles? What is this greed that is insatiable? What is this selfishness? What is this corruption that we are constantly trying to get more things? Where will you take these things? People become so self-centered that all that matters is them, because nothing else matters, it's them. But sometimes when you are so preoccupied with yourself so that everything is you, that's when you have actually lost everything. You had? Yes. Yes. Thank you so much.
The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2004 to Wangari Maathai for her contribution to sustainable development, democracy and peace.
Mwiretu agita mai akinuka ruhano rwakwa rugathirira hau na niĩ mũnganire na mũndũ ũtekũnganĩra arĩo nĩ kabĩa na niĩ ndĩo nĩ kabũri.
Vamos a ir a